Although I'm sure that a lot of people can probably relate to my story of how I grew to love watching anime, I would like to think that my experience was quite unique compared to how I noticed most people getting into it. While it seems like the most common experience I've heard from fans who got into anime in the early 2000s were about how they used to stay up late at night watching Adult Swim in order to catch their favorite anime such as Naruto and Cowboy Bebop, I never had that luxury since my family got cable television and high-speed internet late into my high school years. And so before that happened, my brothers and I were only able to watch anime every Saturday morning when weekly shows like Fox Kids, Fox Box, and 4Kids TV were still running. However, despite these limitations on how I was able to consume anime, this was still enough to hook me in, and to this day, I cherish those simpler times because I had a lot of fond memories bonding with my brothers since we always used to watch anime together. Shows such as Metabots, Ultimate Muscle, and One Piece were some of my favorite anime to watch during my adolescence, but if there was one anime that stood out to me the most that influenced how much I really love watching anime, it had to be Shaman King, since I can clearly remember being infatuated with it for its intriguing premise and memorable characters. So when it was announced that Netflix would be rebooting Shaman King, I was ecstatic to see that an anime that I used to watch all the time when I was a teenager was coming back, and that this time around, the anime would be closely following the original story to satisfy those who read the manga. So because I had only watched the weird English dub version of Shaman King when I was younger, and I never actually read the manga, I knew that it was finally time to dive into the manga that I've been meaning to read for so long, and to also once again watch the anime that defined my childhood. How's it going, anime lovers? My name is David, and I have not only finished watching the first 12 episodes of the Shaman King reboot, but I have also finished reading the manga up to that point. And so today, I want to talk to you guys about how well the anime adapted the manga, and also why Shaman King is so great for those of you out there who haven't experienced the series before. Obviously, Shaman King is a series that is dear to me since it served as the foundation for my love of anime when I was younger, but revisiting the series as an adult has been interesting since it has reminded me of why I love this anime so much in the first place, but it has also made me notice some parts of it that didn't age quite as well. So with that said, let's first talk about how well the story of the rebooted anime was adapted from the manga, and also what was so appealing about the story of Shaman King. When it was announced that the new anime adaptation of Shaman King was going to stick closer to the original story from the manga, I was curious to see if this was actually going to be the case, and so far, I'm happy to share that it was no joke, as I discovered that the story in the anime adaptation was around 90% accurate of what you would read if you were ever curious about going through the manga. However, there were some interesting changes made, such as a couple of chapters from the manga being cut out in the anime that I wanted to briefly talk about, since these examples of cut content spoke to the different pacing of each version of the story. Before I get into it though, for those of you out there who haven't experienced this series before, the story of Shaman King is led by a young man named Yo Asakura, who starts off as a shaman in training with the innate ability to interact with ghosts and spirits and even channel their powers. Every 500 years in this world, a tournament called the Shaman Fight is held, where shamans from all around the world come together to battle in order to see who will become the next Shaman King and shape humanity's future. And so the story follows Yo's journey to achieving his goal of becoming the next Shaman King. I have to say that revisiting Shaman King was quite an enjoyable experience for me because I got to go through it again with a fresh pair of eyes, since I never went back to watch the old anime adaptation before starting this project. And one of the most interesting things that I noticed now as an adult that has really resonated with me in regards to how Shaman King differentiated itself from other similar shonen series is the influence of spirituality permeating every aspect of its story. What I mean by that is Shaman King stands out by grabbing as many cultural, fictional, and religious references as it can that are tied to the idea of ghosts and spirits and mashes them together into the series, and I love that Shaman King managed to make sense out of it all by having all these ideas contained under the event of a tournament. One of the best examples of how Shaman King just hits different is all because of Yo Asakura, since he's not your typical shonen protagonist. Yo Asakura is not a character that overtly draws attention to himself, aggressively seeks out a fight in order to become stronger, or has some troublesome past that affects his daily behavior, but he's really just a laid-back dude who wants everyone to live in peace and harmony with each other, which I think is a nice change of pace. You can even tell what type of person Yo is from his goal of wanting to be Shaman King just so that he can have an easy and comfortable life. Although Yo does come across as lazy when it comes to trying to keep up with normal responsibilities for someone his age, like keeping up with school, Yo is more than willing to help people or spirits in need if he knows that using his shaman abilities can give them peace. As a matter of fact, it's shown in the manga many times that Yo takes his responsibilities as a shaman seriously by many chapters showing him helping spirits pass on in the afterlife, helping people that are in dangerous situations, or helping people be at peace with themselves, which brings me to some of the cut content that didn't make it into the anime reboot of Shaman King. There are several chapters near the beginning of the manga that basically had Yo showcasing the other responsibilities of shamans other than training himself to use ghosts to fight during the tournament. And while I appreciated the manga showing the less exciting parts of being a shaman, I was actually okay with these chapters not being in the reboot since the cut content didn't contain anything significant that progressed the main story. Other than that set of cut content, the reboot was very faithful to its original source material, which I was glad to have seen, but sometimes the accuracy became a hindrance to the anime, and I felt like the animation suffered a lot because of it, which I will get more into in the next section of this video. For now, I want to conclude this section by talking a little bit more about some of the other qualities of Shaman King's story that I enjoyed and I think could convince some of you guys out there to check out this series if you haven't yet. One of the biggest draws of Shaman King for me was getting to meet all these different characters who have very unique and well thought out backgrounds, and seeing some of these characters that were initially Yo's opponents during the tournament later become Yo's allies, and seeing these characters developing friendships with each other thanks to all the hardships they face together during the shaman fights. Take for example a character named Tao Ren, who started off as a domineering jerk who went around carelessly killing people until he battled Yo as his first opponent during the preliminary round of the shaman fights. This character exemplifies so many reasons why Shaman King is so good, because Tao Ren came from an infamous family of Tao priests who were driven to the mountains in China after people ostracized them for being shamans, and so it was not hard to see why Ren behaved so violently since his family raised him to be a hateful person. However, Ren is not a simple character as his background may portray, because although he initially wanted to become Shaman King to destroy all of humanity, it wasn't until his fight with Yo during the tournament that Ren realized that not all people were as bad as his family made him believe when he was growing up. So when Ren had this epiphany, he knew they had to make peace with the source of what was really holding him back from fully realizing his potential, which was to go back home and confront his father in order to end the cycle of hatred that he had within himself first before trying to fix the world. One last thing that I want to share when it comes to why I love Shaman King is that I appreciate the fact that Shaman King makes it a point to further reinforce its overall focus on spirituality by showing these characters having profound moments of introspection and driving home the point that your spiritual well-being is way more important than your victories or failures in life. Another character that I absolutely adore in this series is a character named Wooden Sword Ryu, who I believe embodies the heart of Shaman King in the sense that Ryu's goal in this story isn't necessarily a grand goal like to become the next Shaman King, but instead, Ryu mainly wants to find his happy place, and he is just so interesting because he goes wherever his life wants to take him in order to achieve that goal, and kind of acts like a spiritual guide to some degree for the other characters as well. Ryu is a character who starts off as this comedic goofball gang leader who seems like someone that could easily be overlooked in this series, but the story does such a wonderful job of revealing more about his personality and why he has his own gang that Ryu honestly became one of my favorite characters in Shaman King when I went through this series again as an adult. Ryu turns out to be someone who actually has a big heart because every single one of his friends in his gang were actually people who were once in really dark places in their lives, and Ryu was the only one who was there for them and helped them become a part of something bigger. Ryu is such a selfless character that there are moments during the story where he will literally go out of his way to help people in need, and even delaying his own set journey at times just to see where another road in his life may take him. There is so many more examples I could bring up about how well Shaman King never forgets to smell the roses and reflect on the meaning of happiness and finding your life purpose. But for now, I'm going to leave you guys with one of my favorite clips from this anime that sums up a part of why the story of Shaman King has such a special place in my heart.
Path I was meant to take, huh? You may be right about me being apathetic, but I honestly don't see any value in being so concerned about the unknown. I think it's more important to live in the present and find what's most meaningful to you. I mean, that's my honest opinion on the matter, at least.
Lord Yo.
We'll be fine. You've got what it takes, Amidamaru. I'm sure everything will work out.
Everything will work out.
When I think back to what I remember the most about Shaman King when I was watching the first anime adaptation as a teenager, the visual designs of the characters, ghost, and power upgrades were what stood out to me the most because they were all so unique and creative. As a matter of fact, I am willing to argue that the creativity for Shaman King's visual designs is still unmatched in the sphere of the shonen genre today. One character from Shaman King named Silva is not only one of my favorite characters from the series, but I also think that he is a great example of how imaginative the visual designs can get. From first impressions alone, I'm sure that you can tell how much Native American culture influenced this character's visual design. But as cool as Silva already looks in his everyday getup, the visual depiction of his spirits and powers are what really makes Silva probably one of the coolest characters you will ever see in Shaman King. Silva is quite unique because he doesn't just have one ghost to use during battles, but he actually has 5 spirits that he can call upon that all transform into different accessories and give Silva many powers to use. So, for example, Silva has a spirit turtle that can transform into a shield in order to protect himself, and also a spirit eagle that can transform into wings so that Silva can fly. On top of that, he can even combine all these spirits together to make this awesome looking spirit cannon, which is personally one of my favorite powers I've seen in this series, since it reminds me so much of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers cannon, and the visual design of how the cannon is constructed is just so cool to me. Now, while Shaman King's power system is also one of my favorite things about this series since it's so intricate yet sensible, I'm not going to get in depth about it here since that could be a whole video on its own, but my point is that Silva design is just a great example of the visual creativity in Shaman King, and I haven't even touched on the rest of the characters yet who are just as good. Every character has something unique about them that makes them visually unique, like a character named Hodo who has a snowboarder persona, Ryu and his ever-changing pompadour, or Tao Ren's huge hair spike. However, for as much as I loved all the visual designs presented in Shaman King, there is one huge issue that I noticed in both the manga and the anime reboot that quite surprised me, since I never really thought about it until I revisited the series. So because I'm watching this reboot with a new perspective as an adult, and this was also my first time reading the Shaman King manga, I never noticed how simplistic many of the fight scenes were until now. While there were a couple of fights that I did like in the 12 episodes that I saw, such as the Yo vs Silva fight and Yo vs Tao Ren during the Shaman fight, I just felt like the way that most of the battles were played out could have been more interesting, since a huge part of Shaman King are the fights that take place in nearly every single episode. The best way I can describe how most of these fights tend to play out is basically watching two people constantly spamming their attacks against each other until eventually someone wins. And since Yo was involved in all these battles, the story would insert some unsatisfying reason for why he won most of his fights. For instance, Hodo Hodo vs Yo was a fight in which Hodo Hodo nearly dominated the fight by using only one of his attacks over and over again until both Yo and Hodo Hodo used their big special attacks in the end to determine who would win the fight. Another fight that was disappointing to me was the Faust vs Yo fight, in which the fight ended pretty much the same way, with both competitors using their big special attacks against each other, but there just wasn't that much exciting fighting between these two for me to even enjoy seeing who could possibly win. What made the Silva vs Yo battle so great to me was that Yo was learning to use a new power, and Silva was inadvertently teaching Yo how to use his powers in different ways while also qualifying him for the Shaman fight. The Yo vs Ren fight was also great because it involved smarter uses of each fighter's power stats and the competitors figuring out how to use their own strengths more wisely, while also being aware of each other's weaknesses to determine who would win. What I'm trying to say is that if more of the fights in the series actually involve some strategy or new skills that the fighters picked up against each other during their battles, then I would have for sure enjoyed these battles a lot more. But during the 12 episodes that I watched, that just wasn't the case. However, even though I am being very critical of the fight since I've only seen 12 episodes of Shaman King, I am open to the possibility of being proven wrong and the future fights being a lot more impressive than the ones I've seen so far. Speaking of the Faust vs Yo fights, this battle also revealed the Reboot anime's weaknesses, which was the animation for the battles and also the animation in general outside of the battles. I noticed having this issue with the animation straight away from the first episode, and my main problem with it is that the animation just doesn't show enough impact during certain situations, like when a character named Manta overreacts to ridiculous situations in nearly every episode, and yet the animation is very unsatisfying to watch since it doesn't match the intensity of his reactions. This lack of intensity was also present during the battles when shamans were performing their moves, and I really do think that if this aspect of the animation was better, it would have made up for how simple many of the fights were. Overall, the animation was not terrible, but just serviceable. However, comparing it to other modern shonen anime, Shaman King needed the animation to be on point to compete, and unfortunately, the animation was one of the biggest weaknesses of the Shaman King Reboot anime for me. Another odd thing that I noticed during my time watching the anime was the inconsistency of the more mature and gore-filled moments. Going back to the Faust vs Yo fight, this battle was one of the biggest letdowns for me because the animation just didn't have enough flair to match the stakes of this fight, which were so high for Yo since Manta was directly involved in this fight after getting captured and used as bait. Faust was being very devious in his tactics during this fight to win against Yo, but the anime didn't do this fight justice at all since it censored the parts during the fight where Faust was actually cutting open Manta's chest to see what Manta was made of, which was a huge problem I had with the anime since this part was shown in the manga. This fight could have been so much more intense if the anime had just shown the gore in this battle, because that's what made this fight so different from the other ones so far. and yet the anime played it so safe and made it seem like just another fight that Yo could possibly overcome again. I was just looking for the animation to go all out during this battle, such as seeing the animation create a creepier atmosphere, since that would have fit so well for this particular battle, and possibly giving this battle more time to ramp up by making it 2 parts to show how intense this battle really was. But unfortunately, this battle just felt really tame, and it could have been so much better. It also baffles me that during the next episode, after the Faust fight, the anime literally showed 2 animal spirits showing their hairy balls and pissing on Manta, and yet they couldn't show a brief moment of gore from the Faust fight. So I'm just sitting here wondering why there was so much inconsistency in the animation, and why the anime didn't just go all out for this reboot that fans have been waiting on for such a long time. Overall, I must say that I did enjoy revisiting the series once again to remind myself of why I used to love Shaman King so much when I was younger, but I was hoping that this anime reboot was going to hold nothing back animation-wise to make its triumphant return a lot more memorable. This is where I thought that the anime reboot could have made some changes to improve the original source material by getting more creative with this animation and adding some more flair to the weakest parts of the series, which were the battles. Because the majority of the story in Shaman King involved fighting, and the battles left a lot to be desired since the majority of them were very brief and simplistic, the animation just didn't impress me enough to cover up that weakness, and in my opinion, this is where the manga picks up the slack and was just a better experience, since Hiroyuki Take, who is a mangaka of Shaman King, did a great job at capturing the impact and brutality of the fight scenes better than the anime. The question of whether the manga is still better than the anime was a tough decision for me to make, because even though it's great that the adaptation was sticking closer to the original story this time, I just wish that the animation was better for a new generation of people who may be experiencing the series for the first time through the anime, in order for them to get why this series was so hyped in the first place. However, even though I thought the animation could have been better, I want to emphasize that it actually wasn't terrible, and that when I was reading the manga for the story, it was pretty much the same experience as watching the anime. So, with that said, I'm declaring that the final verdict for the Shaman King anime versus the manga will end in a draw. There are so many things that Shaman King does well, and it's certainly a series that I can highly recommend you guys check out if you haven't yet. So if you're into reading manga, then I highly recommend doing that for Shaman King, mainly to get some extra story bits that was left out of the anime. But if you would rather watch the anime, then I think that's a good choice as well, since the reboots kept the majority of the story the same. So if you guys would like me to continue reviewing the rest of this anime to see if my opinion changes, or you may want to know some of the other interesting changes made to the rest of the anime, then let me know in the comments below. And also, don't forget to leave a like on this video if you guys enjoyed it. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. My name is David, and I will see you anime lovers in the next review.